Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about the top EDU security threats, what they are, and how to stop them. My name is Dr. Tim Tillman, and I do work in the education wing of Jamf. And although my focus tends to be on K-12 environments, these threats are applicable to higher ed as well. They're also applicable to small business. These are common threats that are seen throughout most industries. But we're going to talk about how K-12 and higher ed can implement strategies that are specific to their environments. So the number one threat that any educational environment faces is ransomware, in particularly the double extortion concept of ransomware. So double extortion means that not only has data possibly been exfiltrated or encrypted, but also there is a threat of publishing or exposing that data. And for a school district, that is a big deal. And normally, the threat around ransomware is focused on that threat more so than the loss of the data or the encryption of the data. It's more about what is going to happen to that data now that we are no longer in control of it. So, double extortion also tends to disrupt the idea of having simple data backups, right? So, when we have ransomware is usually spread by phishing attacks. It can be spread by a number of ways, but the easiest way for hackers to or attackers to spread ransomware is through phishing. Phishing works. Phishing is easy. It is cheap. It can be outsourced, and it is highly effective, unfortunately. So that is our number one risk. If we look at number two, AI-enhanced phishing, again, we just talked about ransomware and how phishing is the number one methodology for deploying ransomware, and social engineering. So when we talk about phishing, we're talking about mostly email attacks that are cast across a wide net, right? Most of the time, phishing is not a targeted attempt. Now, if there are cases of that in education, there are cases of whaling, there are cases of spear phishing, but most of the time it is a large net that is cast, hoping that someone will click on a link and then expose credentials and allow access to a system. Generative AI has made ransomware even more powerful. Ransomware used to be somewhat easy to detect by the human eye. You could look for misspellings. You could look for links that are weird. You could look for improper grammar. All of those things, if AI is used in the process, are now corrected. So the only real defense that a regular person has to know if ransomware is real or not is really to evaluate the emotional feel of the email. And this is what I teach people is if you didn't ask for that email, it's probably something you don't need to think about. You did not randomly receive a $50 gift card to your favorite fast food restaurant, right? And even if you did, that's probably not the best choice for you to do at work on your work email or anything else, right? So it is a psychological effort around ransomware now because you can no longer trust that something in that email is going to be so stand out that a user is going to look at it and say, "Oh, well, that's obviously phishing." So we need to teach people. We need to, and we'll talk about mitigation later, but we need to teach people how to effectively do that. The impact of phishing obviously is credential theft and exposure of authentication elements. Number three, your supply chain. And in this case, I'm just going to call it third-party attack. But the vendors that we rely on in education, and we do rely on a lot of them, and I cannot emphasize the word rely enough. There has been a transition from local data and local file servers and local data centers at school districts to almost completely relying on vendor capabilities. So those vendors now become our risk factor and our vector. We do rely on a lot of third-party systems, such as the LMS or the student information system. We rely on third-party infrastructure. We rely on Chromebooks being third-party infrastructure, right? We are always kind of depending on our vendors to be 100% available, 100% accurate, 100% safe and secure. That doesn't always happen. Those companies, just like any other company, is exposed to risk just like we are, and we have to be ready for when they experience risk. So a single vendor breach can lead to mass data theft across hundreds of institutions, and we may just be one of them. And I know from experience that one of the problems or one of the concerns that EdTech leaders have about this particular scenario is that they have absolutely no power and no voice when a third party is attacked. There's nothing they can do about it. All they can do is sit back and wait and see what happens. And that is unfortunate. And that is something that perhaps in the future we can look at as a mitigation strategy to say we need more information during that process. We need more ability to communicate with our users during that process. Number 4 is data exposure, just in general, data exposure, but specifically through misconfigurations. Okay, so like I said before, we use a lot more cloud-based systems now. Cloud-based systems have a habit of being very easy to set up, very easy to get running, which also means they're very easy to forget about. And they're very easy to misconfigure because you don't have to have a system fully and absolutely secure before you can launch it. It doesn't have to pass any safety quiz in order for you to make data accessible to the entire planet. So oftentimes what we see in a cloud configuration is something that was launched maybe for a test or something that was launched temporarily that was never taken down. Something that was, in that case, abandoned, or just straight up misconfiguration of, oh, I thought I had it working because the website launched, right? But at the same time, maybe we were using plain text credentials, or maybe we were, exposing data that we should not have been exposing because we didn't take the time to treat a cloud environment like a local environment where we would have gone through a lot of checks. We would have double checked, triple checked, whatever. It is very, very easy to make a misconfiguration in a cloud environment because there are so many configurations to be done. So oftentimes people do not have the training they need. People do not have the experience they need in order to verify all of those things. We also look at things like excess permissions within a cloud environment. We look at lack of role-based controls. We look at the failure to audit in a cloud-based environment. All of these things are commonplace. This is not just schools failing to do their jobs. This is a very common factor of all industries that these things do not occur in cloud-based environments, mainly because it's too easy. It's very, very easy to set these environments up and to forget about all of the due diligence that has to be done in the background. One other problem with misconfiguration is the possibility of multiple identity providers that may also be using social login and using inconsistent practices across your user base. So if you have multiple identity providers, you may have a problem with synchronization across those providers. A user may change a password, but it doesn't change on all systems because you have multiple providers. That becomes a vulnerability, not just for the user's ability to access data, but maybe they're using an old password that was exposed. Maybe they're using a password that is part of a password breach, right? So they did what they were supposed to do. They tried to change their password, but because it didn't synchronize, that's now the fault of the EdTech environment, the EdTech leadership, right? Excess permissions are common. They've been common forever. It is important that we audit permissions, that we look at things, and we make sure that people have only the access they need. We'll talk about least privilege later when we talk about mitigation strategies. But back to social login. This is things like login with Google, login with Facebook, login with whatever. I think even I want to say Pandora or somebody created a social login. But these things are not necessarily for industry environments, right? These are for home users most of the time. These are for very simple access. But the problem that we have is we use in education in K-12, and specifically, we use this massive social environment called Google Chrome. And the Chrome login is a social login that often can be used on multiple other websites without the permission of the IT department. So if a user, a teacher, a student, an administrator, whoever goes to a website, they can say, of course I want to use my Google login. Let me just click here. And the next page that comes up is this list of things that you're about to share with this third-party vendor you've never heard of. And of course, what do? You click, yeah, of course, share it all, right? Because I want access to the end result. I'm not, as a user, I'm not thinking about all of those things. I'm not evaluating that. I'm just saying, yeah, whatever, just click it, right? And you know that happens. It happens every day. But as an ed tech leader, you have the ability to restrict that kind of access. You have the ability to say, no, I do not want the Google login to be used on anything except these vetted sites. And that takes another layer of control, and it takes another layer of audit, and takes another layer of configuration. But it is the right thing to do to prevent that from happening without your knowledge and without your expertise in place. And the inconsistent practices is just like that. Well, we use Google for this, we use Facebook for that, we use this for that. Sometimes we log in with our Windows ID. Sometimes we log in with our special Chrome ID. Sometimes I use a different username because they didn't set me up in that system. All of those things create vulnerabilities just by themselves. And the risk of data exposure is very high when there's not a consistent and reliable environment for users to rely upon. And number 5, outdated systems and IoT. Now, I throw these two together because outdated systems are a risk that is real, and most people know that older technologies are a risk, but newer technologies are also a risk. And legacy environments are often no longer being supported by their manufacturers. Therefore, they become a target. Legacy environments create all of those inconsistencies we just talked about. So if you have to have special cases for older technology, that is something you need to think about getting rid of, right? Because again, when you create special environments, you create special cases, you also are creating more vulnerability, you're creating inconsistency, you're creating the environment for something to go wrong. IoT, which is just what we're calling basically new technologies, and IoT is not quite as damaging as new software technologies, but we're going to talk about the hardware basically. So if you are putting in IoT devices, and this would include things like screen sharing devices like Apple TV or Google Chrome's, whatever the thing is called, or we look at digital assistance devices like Alexa, or Apple has their home pods, things like that. These are all things that people play with in their homes, and then they go to school and wonder why they can't use those very helpful devices, right? Sometimes schools say, I think you can use them. And they're not putting policies in place that prevent people from using them, so they use them anyway, and it becomes kind of a shadow IT environment. All of those things create unsecured entry points for attack. They all create weirdness, what I call weirdness environments of, are they sharing data or not, and how do we know? Because we don't know. Oftentimes, IoT devices, especially the ones by the large manufacturers, are locked environments that we have no visibility into. We don't know what's being done. We don't know what questions are being asked. We don't know what answers are given. We don't know what data is being asked for or provided. We just don't know. So we have to consider that those things are a threat to the environment. And this would include also things like screen sharing of remote access devices like a smart board, a smart panel, right? Those things often have internet access of their own, but they are running maybe an Android operating system that is 5 or 6 flavors back, right? And those things need to be considered IoT devices. Even though they are school-approved devices, they are still IoT, and we need to treat them kind of in a bubble of special security of patch management and all those kinds of things. So how do we start mitigating some of this? We're going to go right back up to number 1 again in ransomware, and we're going to talk about some basic mitigation strategies for each one of these. And these are the things that you can do to bolster your security in your environment, whether you think you need it or not. These are very simple things to do. They don't often cost a lot of money. They don't often cost a lot of resources, They are going to cost time and sweat and tears, but these are things that you can do without having to go to your board and request more funding. So number one is you should have a 3-2-1 backup strategy. We've been preaching 3-2-1 since 1994 when I started working in this environment. And 3-2-1 is basically you need 3 backups of data you want to save. 2 of those backups should be on separate media, and 1 of them should be in an offsite environment or air-gapped in some way, right? So this only applies to data that you are backing up. You don't have to back up every single bit of data in your environment. You need to back up sensitive files, critical files, mission critical files, emotionally critical files, teacher data, right? They would be emotionally upset if they lost all of their work for the last 5 years that they've been working in your district. Those are things that need to be backed up. And you do need to employ 3-2-1. 3-2-1 gives you the ability to possibly recover from a ransomware attack. So if you have backups that are unencrypted, right, that are not they're encrypted by you, so that's okay. But I mean that they were not part of the ransomware encryption, right? Your local backup, the most current local backup may actually get encrypted on the server. So what good is it to you? So if you have 2 of those, you have one in a different type of media, whether that be cloud, whether that be a hard drive, whether that be, oh my God, if you're still using tapes, or whatever it is, right? Make sure you employ a 3-2-1 backup strategy. Network segmentation is another way of dealing with ransomware. However you choose to segment your network in a K-12 environment, we sometimes say that teachers and students should be segmented. They will also sometimes run a separate network for security devices, or a separate segmentation for security devices, a separate segmentation for large-scale video access or security systems, or fire alarms. All of those things that use your network may be segmented. But the point is, if you have a ransomware attack, it's very difficult for ransomware to cross segments, because it's crossing from computer to computer to computer on the local network or within the local subnet. So if you have a network segmentation, there's a very good possibility that if a student is attacked, it will remain within the student segmentation. Or if a teacher is attacked, it would remain in the teacher segmentation and possibly not get to your servers, possibly not get to your administration, right? So if you start segmenting through VLANs or even physical segmentation, you can reduce the impact of ransomware. So the next strategy is incident response. Knowing what you're going to do if there is a ransomware issue is incredibly important. But more important is telling other people what they are supposed to do. Incident response is not always about you and your team. It is about letting everyone know, all the stakeholders, let them know what their responsibilities are, what the expectations from you to them are, and how to respond to a threat. Okay? Incident response is sometimes misconstrued as, the actual steps that you're going to take to mitigate an incident. It's really more of a communication document. It's really more of I need everyone to know that you have this task, you have this task, you have this task. Here is the order of operations we're going to call and get everybody on board. Here are the decision makers. Here are the financial ability. Here's who we're going to call if we need help. All of those things. Here's who we're going to inform, whether that be like our state police, our FBI office, all of those things. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of the incident, because people will be emotionally charged during an incident. They will make mistakes during the incident. I know you want to believe that your people are amazing and they're awesome and that you're amazing and awesome, and you are. But during an actual incident, the stress level will skyrocket and you are prone to make mistakes. You need to be able to rely on an incident response plan or manual or program to say, okay, I know we talked about this. Here's what we're supposed to do next. Here's what we're supposed to say. Here's who we're supposed to inform. Here's how we're supposed to mitigate this. It's very important. And then last, we talked about ransomware being spread through phishing. Having an enhanced phishing detection and an enhanced strategy within your environment is very important. If you use Gmail, which a lot of K-12 systems do, there are advanced phishing techniques within Google. You may have to pay for them. You may have to configure them. You may have to deal with some pain in that process of over activating it or over detection, but it is worth it. It is not 100%. Nothing is 100%, but it's better than nothing. And also, enhanced phishing detection will also give you probably data loss prevention, which would allow you to set up policies around oversharing. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in the next one as well. Okay, strategies for phishing and social engineering. This is where multi-factor authentication is your friend. I personally believe that implementing multi-factor authentication across your district for all users, is the most effective cybersecurity strategy that you can deploy ever. Multi-factor authentication cuts down on so many aspects and mitigates so many things. It is the ultimate control for K-12. I cannot stress that enough. Multi-factor authentication for all of your users. And I know what you're saying already, and I know you're yelling at the screen, and you're saying, but we can't do it for students. It's too hard for students. It's too hard. They can't use their phones in school. They can't do this. They can't do this. They can't do this. There are ways of providing multi-factor authentication in a manner for students that is acceptable for them. There are things like passwordless login. There are pictographs. There are ways to treat the local network and trusted environments and trusted devices as a factor, right? It may not match NIST standards in some cases if you do some things like that, but it is still multi-factor authentication. If you consider things like geofencing and locking out IP addresses and times of day login and all of those things, I would consider that factors. NIST may not, but that's not the point. You are hardening your authentication environment by deploying those things, and you should consider them, right? If you can get to the point where you're actually doing true NIST-approved two-factor authentication with students, I think that's fantastic. I don't know how you're going to do it. I haven't thought about it much around the perfect way to do it because no one has a perfect way. But you can consider a lot of those things that I just mentioned. Email filtering, again, and detection is part of the phishing and social engineering. Data loss prevention, we already talked about. Training and awareness. I know everybody hates security awareness training, but it is vital. It is vital to remind people on a consistent basis, not an annual basis, but on a consistent way. You must always be training people. Show them what is out there in the world that lurks to attack them. Phishing has become, over the last decade, it has become something that we have relied almost solely on the users to be responsible for. And the users are relying on the EdTech leaders to be responsible for. We keep saying, oh, well, you need to learn how to detect phishing. That's true in a way. But what I would suggest is that we start teaching people how to be suspicious of email, how to be suspicious of any communication they receive, whether it's smishing, phishing, vishing, any of those things. If they receive a random text message, if they receive a random email, they need to learn how to be suspicious. They need to learn that it's okay to delete something. Users are sometimes scared to delete emails or not respond to emails in a work environment. They think that there's going to be some consequence. If they see an email that came in from their superintendent or their lead teacher, and no matter what it says, they are going to feel the emotional connection to say, I need to respond to this. I need to do what they told me to do, or I'm going to get in trouble. You, as the EdTech leader, need to start changing that narrative. Start to work toward the ability to say, what is the content of the message? Because the message is no longer going to be identifiable. You must look at the content and decide for yourself if this is suspicious or not. Is it normal that your superintendent would ask you to send all of the W-2 files for the entire district to his personal email address? No, that is not a normal activity. So question it before you do it, right? Don't respond to the email. Use a second factor, right? Pick up a phone, talk to them in person, determine if that's a legitimate request. Is it logical that on the last day of school, you receive a $50 gift certificate to your favorite fast food restaurant? Okay, this one's a little more tricky. Yes, it may be logical. Is it something that you think is real? You should question it, right? Because, first of all, I don't think your school district is in the habit of giving you free money. I don't think your school district is in the habit of giving you $50 gift certificates. So think about things like that. Think about the concept of, yes, it looks great. I would really like to have it, but people need to learn how to get past that emotional feel, because that is what kills them every single time with phishing. It's the emotional impact. It's the fear factor. It's the sense of urgency around phishing. Those are the things that really get people involved. And you, as the EdTech leader, can make steps that make that different for training and awareness training. Don't focus on things like how to do password complexity. Focus on what actually makes an impact when you're doing awareness training. That's the stuff that people won't skip past. That's the stuff that people will actually listen to. If you make it personable and you make it real, they will listen and they will start to change behaviors. All right, moving on to third-party risk. I have a lot of bullets here, but third-party risk is a really big deal these days. And this is also referred to sometimes as supply chain risk. This is that concept of protecting yourself when someone else is responsible. So we have to do vendor vetting, and it's hard to do in K-12 because the vendors, the larger vendors, they have the power and they know they have the power. And they are willing to say, if you don't want to do it our way, you don't have to buy from us. But that may be something that you decide as a school district that if they take that stance, you don't want to work with them because they are not playing fair. They are not playing to the standards that you put forth. A lot of vendors will listen to your requests, and a lot of vendors will listen to your concerns and help you understand how they address those concerns. You need to put into your procurement documents the need for contractual security requirements. So you need to tell the vendors that before you sign this, you do agree to certain levels of SLA, you agree to certain levels of audit, you agree to certain levels of expectation around, not just your SOC 2, SOC 3 reports, things like that, but that you will communicate with us if you have a problem. You will tell us what's going on, right? Because we have a responsibility to our user base. We can't wait for you to issue a press release before we can inform our folks. We can't wait for you to resolve the issue before we can tell anything to our folks, because our folks are seeing an immediate impact. And we need to be able to tell them something other than, well, it looks like they have a problem and we're waiting for a resolution. Those are the things that can be part of the contractual security requirements that get that company to agree to those kinds of standards long before you give them any money. Least privilege vendor access. This should be something in your tool belt. A lot of vendors, especially HVAC vendors or remote teaching, a lot of different vendors require remote access to the network. When you give it to them, make sure you are following the principle of least privilege, right? Do not just give them a teacher account, right? Oh, well, they just need an account. Just make them a teacher and let them log in. No. You need a special vendor account that can do nothing except access their own system, and that is it. Don't let them print. They don't need to do anything other than access their system. This is least privilege vendor access. It would be great if you had some way of controlling vendor access, meaning that maybe a vendor has to request access for a certain period of time, and then that access is no longer available to them. Maybe a vendor has to give you a lot of information about who's going to access the system, when, and what they're going to do. Maybe you monitor that system while they are using it. There are a lot of things you can do around least privilege for vendor access, because a vendor access is, if you've worked in K-12 or EdTech for a while, you know that oftentimes vendor access is just log in with the vendor name, the password is the vendor name, and everybody at our organization uses that login. We log in through a random PC Anywhere connection, or modem dial-up in some cases we still use. And we just use these two passwords, and then we have complete access to the system. It's not a big deal. And everybody does it. That is not a secure environment. You know that. But in the back of your mind, you may be thinking, yeah, but they can't do anything. Well, that's not the point. They can do something. They can take down your HVAC system. Schools can't operate without HVAC. Schools cannot function without their water systems, their power systems. All of these things are electronic now, right? So you have to deploy the same securities that you would deploy for an administrative user or for a teacher or for an adult user that you would also deploy for vendors. Do not let the vendors force you into deploying something that is insecure, and that happens a lot, especially with these vendors. You need to stay aware of the industry. Make sure you know what the biggest threats are out there right now and how they may impact your vendors as well as yourself, but how they may impact your vendors. Be prepared for attack. Be prepared to communicate and to be able to answer questions for your superintendent, for your board, when they see something pop up on the news and then they ask you the next morning, what is this and what's going on? You need to be the hero who can say, listen, I've been following this for like a week now. Here's what's really happening. This is not what the media reported, but here's what's really happening. Here's how we are already taking steps to prevent that from occurring in our environment. I've already contacted these 3 vendors who might be affected by that, and they say that they have it under control as well. I have to trust them in this environment, but we're also prepared to operate without them, or we're prepared. We copied an offsite backup. We did all of these things in preparation for what if they get attacked. Those are the things that you can do as part of staying aware in third-party risk. Okay, next up is audit. I'm a big fan of auditing everything. Audit your environment, audit your people. Make sure that when you say something works a certain way, test it. Make sure it works a certain way. That's all part of audit. Make sure that when you do a 3-2-1 backup strategy, that you can actually restore those backups. When you say, I want to audit a SOC 2 report from a cloud vendor, do you just get a copy of that SOC 2 and file it away, or do you actually read it? And do you actually say, oh, it looks like they actually had some vulnerabilities. I'm going to follow up with this with my success manager, or I'm going to follow up with my salesperson and say, I would like to know that this risk that was identified in your SOC 2 is mitigated. Because it's not just about like CYA. It's more about peace of mind for you. When you can say, I believe that our vendors are doing the best that they can do, that they are doing due diligence and they're doing due care, that is peace of mind for you. Is it a Fort Knox? No. Is it a perfect environment? No. But at least it helps you not be in the dark. Again, when your management comes to you and says, explain this, right? And they're always going to approach you in the hallway when you don't have your notes with you. You should be ready to explain it. You should know what's going on in the world, or they should trust you enough that when you say, I'm actually not aware of this, or we're in the middle of this, let me get back to you, that they should trust you enough to say, okay, you go figure it out and then let me know. But if they can't rely on you, they're going to stop asking you questions. And that is one of the worst things that can happen is for your management to stop asking questions about things, because that means they don't trust you anymore. They don't want to hear your answers, and they're ignoring you, right? That's when budgets stop getting approved and trust goes out the window. So stay aware and audit. Those things kind of go together. These things don't cost a dime for you to do, but it makes you a cybersecurity hero. Okay. Next up is to standardize your single sign-on and identity provider solutions. We talked earlier about this bifurcated, in most cases, a bifurcated environment of using multiple authentication systems to get to an endpoint. This happens naturally. This is not something you've done that was wrong or incorrect. This happens over time. And as vendors try to lock out other vendors or have exclusivity over authentication methods, this is what happened, right? Well, we have to use Google for this. We have to use Microsoft for this. We have to use our special Azure login for this particular service.
it is possible to bring all of those things under a central umbrella for an IDP, whatever that IDP may be. We have a pretty good one here called Rapid Identity. But when you put all those things under an IDP, it makes it a lot easier, not just for you, but for the users. And that really is the important part. It makes the login and life cycle process easier for users. It makes it 1,000 times easier for you. If you really dive in, you start automating Lifecycle, you start automating single sign-on, it makes it easier for you too. All right, and we talked a little bit about enforcing social login restrictions, enforcing the restrictions. So you as an administrator, you have the ability to say, I will not allow my accounts to log in using their Google login to third-party websites without me vetting them first, right? If you are not doing that, that is really something you need to think about right now, because it takes nothing. It takes no vendor vetting whatsoever for someone to say, here, use your Google login. I could set up a website today that uses the Google login and starts collecting information. Google doesn't vet those requirements. So you don't know how people are using things. And you say, oh, well, it doesn't really mean they can get to anything, right? Well, yeah, actually it does. As a third-party website, you can share drive data with a third party. You can share login information, demographic data. You can share historical login information with websites for some reason. I don't know why you need to do that, but you can. All of these things, almost the entire Google record can be shared with a third-party website through your social login because you said that it was okay. They prompted you and said, is it okay if we share all this information? And you as the user said, yeah, sure, that's no problem. That is the risk there. Okay. So get a handle on it. If you can, get a handle on it. Look at all of the ways that people use social login in your environment and get a handle on it, because all of them have restrictions now. And if you're not doing that, again, it doesn't cost a dime for you to do that. So start thinking about restricting and pulling back your information. Data exposure through misconfiguration. This was, I believe, number 4. Cloud security posture management. This is a whole field within most cloud providers. They have special security tools. They have special security policies. It is not enough for you to set up a cloud environment and just set up servers, right? You must go through the configuration process. You must deploy security posture management. That usually includes things like data loss prevention. It usually includes zero trust principles. It usually includes the ability to audit, and it literally is policies. So if you have technicians who say, well, don't worry about that. We just set it up in AWS. That is the point at which you say, well, what do you mean? Do we have an AWS environment? Well, I just created one today. No. Right? That's where you as the EdTech leader need to say, what do you mean you did one today? Right? That is not our policy. If you want to set up a new cloud-based environment, we have a policy for that. If you want to set up a new server within our existing cloud-based environment, we have policies for how to do that. You don't just do it. You don't just set something up. I know it's easy to do, and that's one of the things that makes it wonderful. But we have to follow the rules, and we have to put some governance in place around cloud-based environments so that we can be more secure. And last but certainly not least, outdated systems. First of all, you need to inventory your environment so you know where your outdated systems are and where your IoT might be. Prioritize patch management. Make sure that systems are patched. Patches are released for a reason. They need to be deployed. A lot of school districts choose not to patch critical systems because they are scared to, or because they are critical systems. If you are prepared for backups, if you are prepared for bare metal restore, if you are prepared for the possibility of standing up a backup in a cloud-based environment, you should not worry about risking your server to a patch. Yes, it's going to be disruptive. Yes, it's going to be painful, but the patch needs to be done. And you can set up development environments. You can set up spare environments. You can test the patch. You can do all those things. You can be ready to do patch management on critical systems. It is often, I have seen it way too many times that people say, well, we can't patch that server because we can't touch it. It's running and we can't move it. We can't bring it down. We can't do anything. If you have a server like that, just by you saying those words, it is a vulnerability. If you are too scared to touch the server, if you are too scared to reboot it, you have problems. End of discussion. So prioritizing patch management is critical. Now, does that mean every single Tuesday you got to have a patch Tuesday and people have to be disrupted? No. You can have a strategy around it. You can have a larger window of implementation than maybe you would have in a Fortune 100 company. But you still need that window. You need regular maintenance cycles. You need regular maintenance windows. Your environment does not need to operate 24/7, 365. Your users think it does, but you know it doesn't. Okay. You must try to allocate funding for consistent and cyclical hardware refresh. This means you cannot just approach your board every single year and say, well, we have some old servers that we'd like to replace. You need to build a governance structure around that to say, listen, we have a board policy that states that servers will not be more than 5 years old. I have 2 servers right now that are approaching their 5-year birthday, and it is time to replace them according to your own board policy. The funding that is requested is for this amount. Cyclical hardware refresh is allowing the board to plan ahead. If you can give them a 1-3-5 year refresh rate, a refresh calendar, and you can say, in 1 year, I'm going to need this much. In 2 years, I'm going to need this much. In 3 years, I need this much. In 5 years, I'm going to need this much to continually replace hardware. And that accounts for laptops, servers, classroom technology, printers, everything. All of it, your entire environment needs to be replaced on a regular cycle. Some things are longer than others, right? Some things you can go 20 years before it needs to be refreshed. But wouldn't it be great if you could say that you are prepared for that and you already know that in 20 years you're going to have to replace that system? Now, in my last environment, I was responsible for things like theater tech, and I was responsible for food service tech, and I was responsible for basically any low voltage system, right? So I could do all of those things. I could say, look, the theater lighting system in this middle school is going to need to be replaced in about 20 years, assuming nothing happens, right? That's just normal use. So when we're able to plan that far ahead, the governance structure of your environment, the board structure of your environment starts to trust you more. Again, and I've mentioned trust before with you and your senior leaders. Trust is so important. If they trust you to be making informed decisions that they can rely upon, they will fund you. They will find ways to fund you. Now, they may ask you to play with that calendar a little bit, right? They may say, well, you have 2 servers that are 5 years old, but next year you're going to have 2 more that are than 5 years old. Could we replace all 4 next year, right? All at once, because we really don't have the money this year. Well, those are some conversations you would need to have, and I would hold them to it. I would say, yes, absolutely, we can do that, but here's the risk of doing that. Here's the risk. I have 2 servers that are 5 years old. If one of them fails, I'm not sure that I can bring it back online without having to buy additional parts or without having to employ emergency purchasing. If you're prepared for that, you're willing to take that risk, then yes, I think we're okay to wait 1 more year, right? Those are the conversations you start having with senior management. And again, when you start treating it as an enterprise environment, you start treating it as something that is critical in nature and not just a random budget request, which is so often is, you will get funding. All right, be aware of end of life and sunsetting software. Again, this is just staying in your industry, knowing what is dying. As I record this, Windows 10 is approaching end of life. Believe it or not, it should have been end of life probably 5 years ago, but it is now approaching end of life, end of support. Right? No longer will it be patched. No longer will it be supported in any way. You should know that. If you have Windows 10 running in your environment anywhere, you should be prepared to replace it. Last, form an IoT committee to evaluate new technologies. Do not rely totally on your IT department to say, well, we don't allow the Amazon Alexa device. Because when you do that, all of your users out there say, oh, well, they won't let us. That's it. And it becomes, again, it's a trust problem. But if you say, actually, we formed a group of teachers and students and administrators and IT people, and we all talked about the Alexa device and what value it would have in the classroom and what impact it might have in the classroom, what its risks are, how would we mitigate those risks, could we mitigate those risks? We really talked about whether or not this device would be valuable in our classrooms. We all agreed that, yes, it's a really cool device and it's fun to play with, but we also agreed that basically it's a toy, and it's a toy that could impact our students, and we're not going to allow it. That you need the power of a committee, you need the power of multiple stakeholders to help you with those decisions, and that will allow you to influence them. I think that's about all the time we have for this. I want to thank you very much for joining me today. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions about this presentation, please contact us at Jamf. We are happy to help you. We are happy to talk about all of these threats and how we provide tools that mitigate those threats or that help you along those way. And thank you. Have a great day.